Welcome to the first video lecture covering content of the 741 class. We're going to talk a little bit about the process of defining leadership and some of the component parts related to defining leadership. The articles that you read for this week's class or this module presents a number of working definitions or sort of moving definitions, not solidly landed definitions of leadership. Holosko in particular reminds us that leadership is both incomplete and in development, and that what we really want to do when we define leadership is operationalize what we are talking about and define the term in such a way as it can be something that people identify with and understand intuitively what is meant. Any definition of leadership is both contingent and context bound, fluid and not fixed. One of the important aspects of developing a definition of leadership is thinking about epistemology, which we can understand as a way of knowing or exploring what knowledge means in a particular context. The knowledge of social work is different than the knowledge of mathematics. An indigenous worldview is different than a mainstream white viewpoint. So epistemology tells us something about what counts as knowledge, what can be known, and how knowledge is created or constituted. It also tells us something about what are the most recognizable forms of knowledge, and perhaps who invests resources and supports in that kind of knowledge. We want to know what leaders know, and we want to know how leaders present their expertise. If we understand leadership to be focused on a kind of mastery of a particular task, action, or area of knowledge. Ontology is a bit of a complicated term, but it's one that you'll talk about a fair amount in the program. It's the process of being brought into existence. So we create understandings of phenomena around us by the way that we talk about them. We also do that by the way we categorize them and demonstrate how they can be seen and known by others. So ontology helps to create or make entities exist and then group them together in like kinds of groups or groups that have some theme associated with them. It's a useful term in research. There's often a hierarchy that exists among the types of entities that are created and grouped. And so we can talk about kinds of leaders, for example. First of all, we can talk about leader. That's an ontological process right there. But then we can talk about kinds of leaders, or better leaders, or lesser leaders, or leaders who are in some way found lacking or wanting. We can also ask questions about how leaders are made, or discovered, or brought into existence in some other way. And those acts of defining tell us something about how we understand leadership. Thinking about ontology as a series of questions that you might ask about something is a useful way of deconstructing the term. It's also a useful way of thinking about what it is that we need to know about leaders and leadership. Ontology is concerned with categories, as I said in the last slide. So when we think about these categories and we apply the idea to leadership, we could ask questions about whether we're talking about leadership on a continuum, so maybe types of leaders or levels of experience of leaders. Or we could talk about it in terms of a binary. You are a leader or you aren't a leader. You are a good leader or you're a bad leader. We could also think about leadership as a broad term or as something that is expressed in a particular context. So the difference between leadership when we talk about social service leadership and being a supervisor for a particular team. We could also think about the processes that people go through to become leaders when they choose or desire becoming a leader. And we could also think about those accidental leaders that sometimes get described as the grassroots leader or the organizational leader, or maybe the mentor. Somebody who is thrust into a leadership role because other people believe that they have some kind of skill, ability, or talent that needs to be shared with others. We can also think about abstract ways of talking about leadership, maybe high theories of leadership, or we could think about concrete ways of talking about leadership, as in the tasks and activities that a leader undertakes. Again, we could talk about a leader who serves a particular function, or we could talk about the complex range of possibilities that relate to the leadership enacted. We can talk about the ideals of leadership and the real deal of leadership, because most of the people I've been talking to suggest that what you think leadership is and what you end up experiencing as a leader can be two very different things. This understanding of leadership definitions draws a lot on the postmodernist. Postmodern theory often presents the idea that we talk ourselves into existence. We create things by the way we talk about them. And so leadership is not exempt from this kind of analysis. Drawing on Judith Butler's work, we could also argue that leadership is performative. If you act like a leader and dress like a leader, perhaps some people will believe that you are a leader. I guess the question is, do you believe you're a leader? Can you talk yourself and dress yourself into being a leader and actually believe it? Sometimes people talk about imposter syndrome when they talk about leadership or advanced study or other kinds of positions where people are seen perhaps as having a lot of power. I'm not really a big fan of imposter syndrome because I sometimes think if you felt like you fit in, what would you have to give up? I'm not sure I'd ever want someone to recognize me as a leader, particularly when I think about some of the stuff that's written in leadership texts from a business point of view. Now, if someone said I was a great grassroots activist, or just activist or advocate in general, I think I'd probably feel better about it. So maybe being an imposter is actually a little bit protective, because if you felt good, what would you have to leave behind? So rather than actually giving you a leadership definition, I'm going to leave you with a couple of questions to think about, just rhetorically, for your own purposes. What epistemological and ontological assumptions are made when we try to define leadership? What are the things that we're creating and imposing when we add a definition? What are the things that we're leaving behind and blocking? What assumptions are we making when we start to introduce these ideas and concepts? And what are the ontological and epistemological assumptions that are present in the papers we read? Are these things that you find helpful or useful? Do they resonate with you in some way? Are they things you're going to keep and hang on to? Are they things you're going to continue to question and throw away? In the last 4 years of teaching this course, I think it's safe to say that people's definitions shift and change over time, and it'll be great to see what happens to your definitions as we move through the course. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to discuss this either on Flipgrid or when we meet. I'll look forward to seeing you again soon and hope you have a good rest of the week.